Shortly before his first inauguration, a candidate spoke to millions and promised a fundamental renewal of national life. The thesis is simple and bold. He set out to transform the arc of public policy and left behind a legacy that is full of contradictions. Three axes will show that tension: domestic social policy, healthcare reform, and foreign engagements. We will examine each in sequence, show specific moments, consequences, and who paid the cost. In one immediate episode, a tense town hall in 2009 turned into a headline when a local teacher was accused of bias and the administration answered with statements that inflamed debate. The date is clear, March 2009, and the atmosphere was hot. The room smelled of coffee and wet coats, and the murmurs of the crowd were audible as microphones hissed. The record shows pages of executive actions and speeches to Congress that framed the intention. Now we begin with social relations to see how that promise played out and why it mattered. The tone will remain critical and evidence-based while acknowledging ideals that motivated those decisions. Stay through the end to see the broader consequence and the final judgment. He sought to change the country, but the result was more complex than advertised. In the first analytic block, the focus was on race, class, and public discourse. The administration framed inclusion as priority, and its rhetoric echoed the campaign mantra, "Yes, we can," 2008. A series of episodes tested that ideal. In one situation, Valerie Jarrett convened community leaders in a late-night meeting in Chicago, the air cool with rain on the windows and the coffee pot hissing in the next room. Inside, Rahm Emanuel leaned forward and said, "We cannot ignore how this reads." And David Axelrod replied, "We need a clearer line." Then a community organizer, Michael, stood up and said, "People need to feel heard." And the president answered, "Then we listen and act," creating a short choreography of decisions. Those exchanges were accompanied by sensory detail, the scrape of chairs, the rustle of paper statements, and the tinny buzz of a recording device. Testimony came from activist Aisha from Detroit, Professor Linda from Harvard, and reporter Mark from a national daily, each describing how statements and policies altered local dynamics. Official responses in 2009 and 2010 were followed by investigations and public hearings that produced both policy memos and unintended polarization. The consequence was measurable protest numbers in dozens of cities and a recalibration of political alliances within minority communities. Institutions such as the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Office, and local school boards were drawn into long debates, and the mix of rhetoric and action left a legacy of both reform and resentment. Passing to healthcare, the second axis was the signature domestic achievement, yet also the most contested. The Affordable Care Act reached its legislative milestone on March 23, 2010, and then produced thousands of pages of rules, implementation memos, and a cascade of regulatory choices that changed how millions access care. In a hospital corridor, a nurse named Maria felt machines humming and smelled antiseptic as she explained to a patient how coverage rules had shifted. A quote often cited, "If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor," 2013 became a political line that crystallized expectations and disappointment. Administrators such as Dr. Atul Gawande and analysts at the Congressional Budget Office and the Department of Health and Human Services each produced reports that added technical weight to political narratives. In meetings, Susan Rice raised fiscal questions, while Joe Biden emphasized the human cost, and Andy Slavitt and others advised on rollout problems. Sensory notes recur in policy scenes: the clack of keyboards late at night, the flash of email alerts, and the paper tang of thick regulatory packets. The implementation produced winners and losers. Insurers adjusted premiums, states navigated exchanges, and small clinics in rural counties reported new administrative burdens. Empirical numbers from CBO estimates, pages of regulation, and budgetary shifts illustrate that the promise of simpler care collided with messy administration and real trade-offs in cost, benefit, and access. At the international level, the third axis shows a different logic of consequence. An approach to diplomacy emphasized negotiation and multilateralism, but it produced strategic trade-offs. A defining event was the Iran-related diplomacy, culminating in an agreement announced July 14, 2015, with relief from sanctions and timelines for verification. In a blue-lit negotiation room, translators whispered. The air smelled of brewed tea, and the clack of shoes on marble echoed as envoys shuffled papers. Samantha Power and Susan Rice debated verification clauses, while allies expressed concern. Angela Merkel delivered cautious support, and Benjamin Netanyahu spoke out in opposition publicly, creating diplomatic friction. A short exchange in the Situation Room had the National Security Advisor say, "We must weigh the risks," and the plan manager answer, "We can build in checks," and the president replied, "Trust but verify," in a practical tone. Financial flows referenced billions of dollars and timelines of years. The agreement included technical annexes and monitoring mechanisms and drew reactions from Congress and regional partners. The consequence was a recalibration of alliances, increased regional tensions, and debate over long-term security costs versus immediate risk reduction. If we step back, the pattern emerges. Across social policy, healthcare, and foreign engagement, the same sequence occurred. Grand promise, legislative or diplomatic action, intensive implementation, and then reverberating consequences that affected ordinary lives. 1 year later, communities reported continuing effects. Hospitals adjusted staffing, and diplomats tracked long-term shifts. The judgment is not purely moral, it is empirical. 3 policy domains produced measurable changes: pages of regulation, budgetary reassignments, billions in finance, and altered diplomatic postures. The legacy is mixed, and for many citizens, the daily impact was concrete, not rhetorical. If this analysis moved you, do share your view in the comments. Tell us which axis touched your life. Start with the sentence, "The axis that most affected me was," and name whether it was local healthcare or foreign policy. Mention your city or workplace if relevant. Your testimony helps the conversation and shapes future reporting. We will highlight thoughtful comments and use them to guide further investigation and community reporting. Now, subscribe for more evidence-based narratives that connect promises to consequences and join a community that values facts, context, and civil debate. He set out to transform a nation, and the record shows a transformation whose benefits and costs are still being counted. Subscribe and join the discussion.